In a bustling city, a lawyer and a businessman find themselves at the center of a story that will shake up their lives. The lawyer, a well-established professional, had always prided himself on his success and reputation. He looked down on others, especially those he felt didn't belong in certain circles. One day he crossed paths with a black businessman who had come to him for help. The lawyer, without hesitation, called the businessman unqualified, dismissing his achievements with a sneer. It was a comment fueled by ignorance and racism, aimed to undermine the businessman's hard work and vision. But what the lawyer didn't realize was that this businessman wasn't someone who would be easily discouraged. Little did he know, that moment of disrespect would set off a chain of events that would leave the lawyer stunned and the businessman on top. The lawyer, let's call him Mr. Clark, had built his career on being tough and unapologetic. With a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, he was respected, feared, and always in control. He had worked his way up, using his intelligence to rise above others. In his eyes, success was a game, and he played it better than anyone. When the businessman, Mr. Williams, walked into his office, Mr. Clark took one look at him and immediately made assumptions. Williams, despite his sharp suit and well-polished appearance, didn't fit the mold of the people Mr. Clark was used to dealing with. There was something about him that didn't sit right with the lawyer, something that triggered an unconscious bias. The meeting had barely started before Mr. Clark made a cutting remark. He told Mr. Williams he was unqualified and not fit for the business world. His words dripped with condescension, and the tone was sharp, dismissive. It wasn't just the words, though. It was the look in his eyes. Clark saw Williams as someone beneath him, someone who didn't belong in his world. It was a gut punch, one that might have broken someone else. But Mr. Williams didn't flinch. He stayed calm, choosing not to engage in the lawyer's taunting. Clark, in his arrogance, assumed that Williams would leave defeated. But that wasn't going to happen. He had just made the mistake of underestimating someone who was far more capable than he could ever imagine. When Mr. Clark made his disrespectful comment, Mr. Williams didn't let it rattle him. His face remained calm, but inside, he was boiling. He had faced far worse than this throughout his life. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him because of his race, but it was still a painful reminder of the bias that still existed. Rather than letting the lawyer's words take hold, Mr. Williams chose to stand his ground. He knew he didn't have to prove anything to Clark or anyone else. His success wasn't defined by others' opinions, but by his hard work, his knowledge, and his relentless determination. He had worked his way up from nothing, learning every step of the way, and earning his place in the business world. No one, not even a pompous lawyer, could take that from him. "I don't need your approval," Mr. Williams said calmly, locking eyes with Mr. Clark. "I've built everything I have with my own hands, and I'll keep doing so." Clark, taken aback by the businessman's confidence, sneered, thinking it was a mere bluff. He was used to people crumbling under pressure, but not this time. Mr. Williams didn't show the slightest sign of weakness. He didn't need to explain himself further. His actions would speak louder than any words. He had always believed that the best response to ignorance was not to engage in a back and forth, but to prove through action that his worth was undeniable. As he left the office that day, Mr. Williams didn't harbor any ill will toward Clark. He knew he would use this moment as fuel to prove that no matter what people like Clark thought, he was more than capable, more than qualified to succeed. And he wasn't going to let anyone stop him. Mr. Williams didn't always have it easy. In fact, his path to success was filled with obstacles, some of which seemed impossible to overcome. Growing up, he was constantly reminded that the world was never going to be fair. As a young black man, opportunities were limited. He watched his peers get better chances, while he had to work twice as hard to prove he deserved the same. He learned early on that no matter how hard he tried, some doors were always going to be closed to him because of the color of his skin. There were countless times when people underestimated him, doubted his abilities, or refused to give him a chance. Whether it was at school or in early jobs, the message was clear: success in certain fields wasn't meant for someone like him. He remembered the subtle, dismissive looks he'd get from people in positions of power when he tried to present his ideas or stand his ground. He would try to push forward, but society's bias would always find a way to pull him back. Even as he started his business, the struggles didn't end. Mr. Williams had to work with people who wouldn't take him seriously. He had to fight harder to get funding, even though his business model was sound. The constant rejection, the extra hurdles he had to jump through just to be seen as equal, wore him down. But he never gave up. He couldn't afford to. Every time someone told him no, it only made him want it more. It wasn't just the business world that was hard. Life itself was hard. He dealt with the weight of racial inequality on a daily basis. It was in the small things, the way people treated him in stores, the way they assumed he was less capable because of his skin color. It was a constant reminder that the world wasn't kind to people like him. But with every setback, he grew stronger. He used every struggle as motivation, knowing that if he could just push through, he could prove them all wrong. His rise wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. But it was his. Every challenge he faced only made his resolve firmer. And each failure was just another lesson that brought him closer to his goal. Mr. Williams was building something, piece by piece, despite the weight of the world on his shoulders. He wasn't just trying to succeed for himself. He was doing it for everyone who had been told they couldn't make it. Years of hard work and relentless dedication eventually paid off for Mr. Williams. Slowly but surely, his business began to grow. He expanded his network, built a reputation for being reliable, and attracted clients who respected his skills and vision. While some people were still skeptical of him, many others saw his potential. With every deal he closed, every client he impressed, he proved that his unqualified label was nothing but a misconception. He didn't just want to build a successful business, he wanted to make a statement. He wanted to show the world that a Black businessman could thrive in spaces where he wasn't typically welcomed. It wasn't about revenge, but about proving that capability didn't depend on skin color. It was about breaking barriers and rewriting the rules that were so deeply rooted in the system. Mr. Williams's breakthrough came when he finally gained the opportunity to work with a large law firm. The project was complicated, but he managed to navigate it with skill and precision. His work was exceptional, and soon he became known as someone who could get things done when others couldn't. His name started appearing in business circles, and people began to take him seriously, not just as a businessman, but as a leader. But that wasn't enough for him. He didn't just want to be successful. He wanted to control his own destiny. He decided to take the next big step, buying the law firm that had once rejected him. He had always dreamed of owning a firm, a place where people like him could thrive. It wasn't just about the money or the prestige, it was about creating a legacy and offering opportunities to those who, like him, had faced discrimination and doubt. It took years of planning, negotiating, and securing funding, but Mr. Williams did it. He was finally the owner of the law firm, the very same firm where the lawyer, Mr. Clark, had made that demeaning comment all those years ago. In his mind, this wasn't just a personal victory, it was a symbolic one. It was proof that hard work, perseverance, and talent could not be dismissed or overlooked, no matter who you were. The journey had been long, filled with challenges, but Mr. Williams stood tall, knowing that this was just the beginning. He had started with nothing but dreams, and now he had the power to shape the future. He had owned the law firm, and in doing so, he had taken control of his narrative. It didn't take long for Mr. Clark to hear the news. At first, he couldn't believe it. The businessman he had belittled, the one he'd called Unqualified, had just bought the very law firm where Clark had spent his entire career. His first reaction was disbelief. He couldn't understand how someone like Mr. Williams, someone he had so easily dismissed, could possibly achieve such success. The news spread fast, and soon Clark's colleagues were talking about it too. Everyone knew the history between the two men, the sharp words Clark had thrown at Williams during that initial meeting. Now those words seemed foolish, out of place, almost childish in comparison to the magnitude of what Williams had accomplished. Clark felt a mix of emotions, shock, embarrassment, and somewhere deep down, a sense of regret. He had underestimated Williams, dismissed him without a second thought, and now, here he was, owning the law firm that Clark had worked so hard to climb in. The lawyer's ego was bruised and his once unshakable confidence started to falter. He tried to brush it off at first, telling himself that it was just luck, or that Williams must have had help from someone powerful. But deep inside, Clark knew the truth. Williams had done this on his own, despite every obstacle that had been placed in his path. There was no denying it. The businessman had earned his place, and in doing so, he had proven that people like Clark didn't have the power to control who succeeded. The realization hit Clark harder than he expected. He had spent so much of his life judging others, holding on to his own superiority, that he had failed to see the bigger picture. He had written off Williams as unqualified, but, in the end, it was Clark who had been blind to the true measure of success. The shame was hard to swallow, but it was the price he had to pay for his own ignorance. When Mr. Williams officially became the owner of the law firm, it wasn't just a professional achievement. It was a personal triumph, a symbol of everything he had overcome. He walked into the firm's headquarters that first day with a sense of pride, but also with a deeper understanding of what this victory meant. This wasn't just about the business. It was about showing the world that people like him, who had been pushed down and underestimated, could rise to the top. The firm's staff had mixed reactions when they first learned of the change in ownership. Some were supportive, others were skeptical. But Mr. Williams didn't let it faze him. He had dealt with doubt his entire life, and now, in this moment, he had the authority to change things. He didn't just want to be another figurehead, he wanted to make a real difference. His goal was to reshape the culture of the firm, create a space where merit, not prejudice, was the determining factor for success. In his first meetings with the team, he made it clear that change was coming. He focused on inclusivity, transparency, and fairness. Williams knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready for it. He had faced far more difficult battles, and now that he had the power, he could ensure that the same biases he had dealt with wouldn't exist in his firm. The respect Mr. Williams earned wasn't instantaneous, but it came steadily. He proved himself by running the firm with integrity and vision. People saw how focused he was, how determined he was to make the firm a place that valued every individual, no matter their background. Slowly, the attitudes began to shift. The staff began to recognize that Mr. Williams wasn't just a businessman. He was a leader, someone who had fought for this position, someone who had earned the right to be there. Meanwhile, Mr. Clark, who had once dismissed him as unqualified, found himself on the outside looking in. The firm that had been his whole career was no longer his domain. His authority began to slip away, and with it, so did the respect he had taken for granted. As he saw Mr. Williams settle into his new role, Clark couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret. But it was too late. Mr. Williams had already won. For Mr. Williams, this victory wasn't about rubbing it in Clark's face. It wasn't about seeking revenge. It was about something bigger. It was about proving to himself, and to everyone who had ever doubted him, that success couldn't be measured by superficial judgments or biases. It was about demonstrating that anyone, no matter their background or skin color, could achieve greatness with enough determination, resilience, and hard work. When Williams walked into the firm each day, he did so not just as an owner, but as a symbol of triumph over adversity. His success wasn't just his own. It was a victory for everyone who had been told they were unqualified. For Williams, this was only the beginning. He had broken through the barriers, and now he was setting the stage for others to follow. As the months passed, Mr. Clark watched from the sidelines as Mr. Williams transformed the law firm. He watched the way people respected him, not out of obligation, but because he had earned it. Clark couldn't ignore the shift happening around him. The culture at the firm had changed. People were treated fairly, they were given opportunities based on their talent, not their background, and that, in itself, was a testament to the kind of leader Mr. Williams had become. Clark, on the other hand, struggled to reconcile with what had happened. He couldn't deny the truth anymore. Williams wasn't just lucky or fortunate. He was capable, and he was now the owner of the very place Clark had worked so hard to climb. For Clark, this realization wasn't just a blow to his pride. It was a wake-up call. At first, Clark tried to brush off the impact of Williams' success. He told himself that business was just business, and he would move on. But deep down, he knew this moment would follow him forever. He had judged Williams too harshly, assuming that his race or background made him less deserving. And now, he had to live with the truth that he had been wrong. For the first time, Clark understood the weight of his own biases. It wasn't just about career or ambition, it was about people. The success of Mr. Williams was a reminder that talent and worth could never be measured by the color of someone's skin. As much as he hated to admit it, Clark had learned a hard lesson. His view of the world had been limited, and now, it was time to change. Whether Clark would ever apologize or even acknowledge the shift within himself, only time would tell. But the firm had already changed, and so had the people in it. They had witnessed what true leadership looked like, and Mr. Williams's victory was a testament to that.